Hello, and welcome to Through the Veil, where we get together to share stories and remember the wisdom that belongs to us. I'm your host, Melissa Camrudin, and I'm here with little baby Ember, who's never that far away, but who's right in arms today. And I will be joined by Dr. Erin who is a local chiropractor, and she is coming to share the birth story of baby Zora. It's a beautiful home birth story. Enjoy. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
Hi.
Just got the baby situated, and then now just really stoked to be here and share my story.
Yes, I'm excited to hear it. Again, I'm kind of like I've heard it once, but I know there's always more details in another telling, so I'm excited to hear it again.
Yeah, I'm curious what's going to come up this time too.
One never knows. Yes, so start with your journey into motherhood. Tell us about that.
All right. So, let me just mute that. So I think for me at least, so I had a home birth, just to lay it out there. But it basically it really started with my birth because I was a home birth baby and my mom had 5 home births. So like growing up, I just thought that was the normal. That's what everyone did, is babies are born at home. That's just what made sense to me. So I guess I've always thought that that's what I would do when it came to be that time for me. Yeah. And then, fast forward, meet my partner, get married, and then, we got pregnant, and it wasn't really, it was a surprise. We weren't trying or anything. So it's interesting what came into my head when I got pregnant. It was like, oh, everyone's mom and dad, like everyone is boring old, like parents, like everyone becomes a parent. Like how boring, like our lives are over. So it's really interesting, like the stories that show up for you and, what I thought of parents. And my husband was like, oh, like, are you sure you even want to have kids? And I was like, of course I want to have kids. Like, we're having this baby. And then, things kind of like, once I got over those stories, I just became so excited to have that baby and go along with that process. I'm also, backstory, I'm a chiropractor. So in chiropractic school, you are educated on the birth process and like through pregnancy as well. So I kind of had a general idea of, the process. And that was very like, how many trimesters are there? Like the different types of like growth and development, what happens, and the different like phases and stages of birth. And then a little bit about the cascade of intervention. So yeah, so I kind of had that in like my back pocket. And then at our office, we also take care of a lot of postnatal and pediatric clients. So part of our intake is actually hearing people's birth stories. And you can really hear in the birth stories that when there is intervention and something happens, you can see how that does cascade, and that cascades into breastfeeding and into so much more in like the growth and development of the baby too, and just the mom and that connection, that bond. So I knew that the birth for me was something I wanted to protect. That's kind of how I went into it. I was like, okay, I want to protect not only my pregnancy, but really my birth. Yeah, so that's kind of like a little bit of the backstory. So we got pregnant, and then I remember we have a doula client who's super awesome, and I was basically like, so if we had a client who was pregnant and they basically wanted a free birth, but also wanted a midwife in the room just knitting in a corner, like, who would you recommend? And she's like, oh, you got to go with this team, go with this midwifery clinic. I'm not going to mention who, just to keep it a little anonymous. But yeah, so that's kind of who we picked. gave him a little bit of my backstory, and we got accepted into the clinic, because that's also a thing. Like, sometimes people can't even find a midwife because they either go in too late or they're just not accepting clients. It's pretty crazy out there.
It is crazy. It's like in BC, it's such a privilege to be able to access a midwife, because you have to basically be privileged enough to know that's an option for you basically before you're pregnant.
Oh,
And you
100%.
have to have such regular cycles that you would know basically at 4 weeks pregnant, like the day you miss your period. You pretty much
Yeah.
have to know then, right? And then register for care right then. And then you'll
Yeah.
probably get in. Like, you might get in on a wait list, but it's so limited in our
Yeah,
province.
and
Yeah.
I kind of knew that. Like, I didn't know how soon to register, but I had a feeling that I was like, oh, well, probably the sooner the better. So I found out pretty much the day I missed my period. I was like, I think like I'm pregnant. And I took a test, pregnant. Took another one,
Yeah.
definitely pregnant. And then I think we registered with them like a couple days later, just to play it safe.
Yep.
So yeah, we got into that midwifery clinic. And yeah, I didn't actually know too much about free birth at the time. I was just kind of starting to like dive in a little bit down that rabbit hole. But yeah, so kind of got in with that midwifery clinic. I was looking into doulas. I also had one of my really good friends who's also a chiropractor. She was 3 months ahead of me in her pregnancy, so she was kind of passing down a lot of like knowledge and information. So that was so helpful, because I don't think I would have made some of the decisions that I made without her and her handing down that information. So yeah, going through the midwifery clinic was really interesting as well, because I knew in my mind going into pregnancy, I was like, okay, I know I don't want an ultrasound. I know I don't want any type of like Doppler. Like, I don't want to hear the baby's heartbeat through like that device. Like, I knew I didn't want rhogam, because I have O negative blood. So I kind of went into, every time I went into the midwifery clinic or for my appointments, I had my guard up in a way, as I felt like I was going into to battle them, and like I was the one who was trying to like protect myself, and they were trying to like get into my birth and get into my pregnancy. So that was an interesting relationship. And I feel like just through pregnancy, there was so much unlearning that had to happen in order for me to make those decisions. And then also learning and becoming more educated on why, like why I didn't want an ultrasound, and yeah, like why I didn't want to do the like group B strep test, or even like any type of like glucose test. And a lot of those reasons, like for example, for like the like blood glucose, I was like, well, I already eat super healthy. I actually do try to eat like protein, carbs, and fat in that every meal. Like, I'm not just eating sugary sweets all day. And I am working out very regularly. Like, I'm doing CrossFit 3 times a week. And if something were to be positive or irregular in those tests, what are they going to tell me to do? Eat healthier and work out more?
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Yeah. So,
Yeah. It's like, what's it going to offer you? Right. If you get it, like, what would it change? I thought of that this time when I was pregnant. I didn't even get blood tests for iron this time, which I'm like chronically anemic. And I'm like, okay, but I know when I'm anemic, actually, because I'll be like, ooh, I should get a blood test to kind of feel. But I already know. That's why I'm getting the blood test. And what will they say? Maybe get an iron infusion, which I didn't want to do. Maybe like eat more red meat or liver, like leafy greens, like whatever. Take some supplements. So like, I'm already doing the things that I think I should do if I'm anemic. And so what would it do? It would scare me. It would make me feel like I might hemorrhage. And I would do nothing different. Like, I am doing all the things. So like, yeah, what kind of information would any of these tests offer me? If it wouldn't change the path I'm on, then no, thank you.
Yeah, totally. So I feel exactly the same. And that was like, even with like the ultrasound, I was like, well, it's not going to change anything because like no matter what, I plan on having this baby. And if so, say something were to come up in like the anatomy scan or something like that, I also know that there's like a very high false positive rate on these. Is it going to change anything? Like already at, even at like 3, 4 weeks pregnant, you feel pregnant and you know that you're carrying life. And for me, I was like, there's nothing that's going to change my decision. So why even do it? And even with like rhogam, I don't know how familiar, you're probably super familiar with it, but they kind of like gave me a hard time with that one because I was like, well, I don't want to get it. It's a blood product, just no interest, absolutely zero interest. And they're like, okay, well, what if? They kept getting me all these what if scenarios. And it was just so hard and so challenging because I'm like, well, we are now just talking in like make believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. What if my baby is positive? I'm like, well, what if I have that physiological birth that I'm planning? Then it should be fine. Like, I really, really do trust the body's design and that, the placenta is there to help like grow and support my baby, but it's also there to help keep our blood separate. So if that is functioning correctly, which it should be, because my pregnancy has been totally fine, there's very low risk, then there is no what if. And we'll just have to wait and see what happens at the birth. Like, I'm not planning to have any ultrasounds. That's like one of the risks for any type of like blood mixing. And same with like forceps. I'm like, okay, well, we're not even there yet. So why am I making these decisions at like 28 weeks?
Yeah, and if that happens, you can make a decision.
100%. Yeah. Like, I really do trust the body's design and the body's power and knowledge. People have been birthing for thousands of years.
Yeah. People with a negative blood type are somehow still around, and rhogam's pretty recent.
Exactly. And then you look into like the studies, and I don't want to go all crazy, but it's just like, oh,
did you read Dr. Sarah Wickham's work?
I did. Yeah, I did.
So good on rhogam. Yeah.
Yeah, it was so good. And it's basically like, well, they saw such great results that they basically stopped the control group. Like, so there's no long-term studies on this. Great. Like, I'm not putting that in my body. Thank you very much.
Yeah. There might have been some sort of external motivation to push that, right? If you're like, amazing, let's not even test it anymore. Let's sell it.
Yeah, exactly.
Not that it's not a thing that doesn't work. Like, everybody to their own, but like, I like a little more data around my drugs.
Yeah, same here. And yeah, like, and in general, like, I'm just like, I remember, this is just funny. Like, I have a naturopath girlfriend, and we were talking about like the rhogam and stuff. And she's like, okay, well, you could do like, I think it's like the NIPS test, and to see the baby's blood type, but they don't do it here in Canada. You have to do like the US version.
Oh.
I'm pretty sure. And it's like, sending blood across the border is like a whole thing. And so but then we had a conversation, and she's like, well, also, Erin, if you get the baby's blood type and it's positive, are you going to get rhogam? Like, is it going to change your decision? And I was like, well, probably not. No. And she's like, well, then why waste your money? Don't do it.
Yeah. And then just think like that would also bring in like an extra piece of anxiety of like, like you're thinking about sharing blood, like through the placenta, like,
yeah,
there could be an error.
Totally. Or it has like this perfectionism thing around the birth, and like, say if it doesn't go, or then I don't want my mind to be so fixated on that when I'm just really trying to really actually get out of my body.
Right. Because anxiety and physiology, like, they're not the best buddies, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm freaking out and I'm trying to have a natural birth. No.
Yeah, they don't go very well together. Yeah. So, I also had, like, going back to like the pregnancy part, like, I also had like an amazing doula through this. Her name's Erin. I won't leave that one.
She's coming to tell her story soon.
Yay! I also had like an amazing doula, and honestly, that's my number one recommendation for anyone. It's like, if you're planning a birth in general, get a doula, because they are just there to help support you, and they've seen birth like 1,000 times, 100 times, whatever. They've seen birth more than you. And they're just there to help support you. And whatever you're going through, like there'd be times where I'd be crying and reach out to her. Or, if my husband didn't understand something or I didn't understand something, I would just reach out to her because she's kind of like this, I would consider them like a neutral body because they're just supporting you in your decision and just trying to help you and help you find the information and material that you need to make those decisions. So I really, really appreciated having a doula because I would tell Ariel, I'd be like, hey, like every time I go into these appointments, because in the beginning you have them like, you don't even have your first like in-person appointment till you're 12 weeks. And then it's like, I think it's like once a month. And then every time they have this like topic list that they're going to talk to you about, you don't know what the topic list is. So each time I'm like going into battle, I'm like, okay, what topics are they going to bring up? What do I have to be educated on in order to like air quote, combat their topic that they're going to try to push on me? So yeah, I would talk to Ariel, like, what do you think they're going to talk about this time? I need to know because I need to do my research beforehand or else I'm going to feel like I'm blindsided by them trying to talk about something I don't really know about yet. And that's not an informed conversation. Don't get me wrong, I love midwives, but it was just like I didn't really appreciate this whole how things went down and how things were planned versus if they would be like, hey, your next appointment, here are the top few topics that we're going to talk about. That would have been really helpful for me. So I remember going into one appointment and we were talking about like the delivery of the placenta for me. And I was like, oh, this is really important because this goes back to the whole rhogam thing. And did we have a physiological birth or not? And it went back into those what if scenarios. Like, what if this happens? Well, what if that happens? Well, what if? It's like, well, I was like, can we just, like, I planned to deliver my own placenta and they were shocked by that. They're like, okay, well, we don't really hear that very often. And I was like, yeah, but that's my plan because I don't really trust someone else helping me deliver it or like pulling it from my body. That doesn't feel right. And I've never done this before, but that still just doesn't feel right from the start. Yeah. So I went into that conversation arms up and I was like, okay, I guess we kind of trust her. She sounds like she knows what she's talking about. So yeah, through the pregnancy, I feel like I was slowly trying to build my rapport also with my midwifery team because I'm like, hey, I understand like the birth process. I've really like dove into the information and I'm really trying to educate myself here from like a physiological point of view and perspective. And I get that you guys are very medical. So yeah, that's kind of how I went through the like whole pregnancy wave. And yeah, my pregnancy was phenomenal. I loved being pregnant in the moment. I loved it. Yeah, I didn't really have too many symptoms. Like I've never got sick. I had really great energy throughout. Like I worked out, ate super healthy. I was still working, being on my feet all day. And then I slowly started to like just take more time off, just also to get our clients used to not seeing me in the office as much. And yeah, like I love being pregnant. I think I stopped work at 35 weeks because I was just like, I think I'm just going to take a step back and just go into baby land. But I was also like researching things in between clients. If I had like a 20-minute gap, I was like, perfect. I'm going to go on Pinterest and look at like really cute baby nurseries. So yeah, I worked up till I was 35 weeks and I was like, okay, baby could come in 2 weeks. Baby could also come in
2 months.
2 months. And I'd always told the midwives that my mom was late. So my mom actually had seven births. So I'm the last baby of 7 to her in hospital, but every single baby to her knowledge was 2 weeks late. So I told them that. I was like, baby's 2 weeks late. And also I didn't really trust my due date from the start. I just didn't trust it. I was like, something about this, like when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, I having a girl and it's in July. And it's in July. And they gave me June 23rd. I was like,
Did they give it to you, like, what did they base it on?
They based it on, like, because I did fertility awareness method.
Oh, yeah. So, like, your LMP, your last period.
So they did base it off of, like, exact ovulation. Yeah. And I was like, I don't know. This just doesn't add up. Like, it's still just not adding up. And something about this says, like, it's July. So I kind of had that in my head this whole time. But yeah, I was off work at 35 weeks and just really prepping for everything, cleaning everything. And I was pregnant for a long time. Like, I remember being I think it was at 40 weeks, and I was in the bathtub. I was like kind of feeling some Braxton Hicks. I was like, gosh, like, I don't know, this feels like something. And I just remember just crying and just like, I'm so done with being pregnant. Like, I just want to be a baby. And calling Ariel and just having a conversation with her. And, you know, she kind of not talked me off the ledge, but she just like gave me some really soothing like words. And it's like, okay, I can do this. Like, it's going to be okay. And in my mind, I was like, there's no way whatsoever that I am getting induced. Like, no, not a part of the plan. It's not even the plan. So, yeah, I remember like around that time we had talked about induction with the midwives, and I was like, yeah, it's not going to happen. Not at all. Like, and they're like, okay, well, what if in this scenario? It's like, no.
Let's talk then.
Yeah, exactly. I remember at one point I asked them about a birth plan. I was like, oh yeah, like I wrote up a birth plan. I plan on bringing, you know, I'll bring that in next time or the time after. And they're like, yeah, you know, you don't really have to bring it to us. It's fine. Like, I think we have all the answers. I was like, no, I think it's a good idea.
No, I want you to know the plan.
Yeah. And so I kind of had like, the one thing I didn't put on there was like the roles. And I should have put the roles on there because then they would have really seen like eye to eye what I was what I had imagined. Because I had like, you know, like my husband obviously in there, the doula, and then I didn't really put the midwife's role, but I should have put that. But in my
maybe that should have been their hint. You don't have a role here.
Yeah, I don't have a role here.
You're not on my plan. I don't know.
or maybe I should look it up. Or maybe I put them as like cleanup. I don't know. It was really funny though. Yeah, like I went over the birth plan. They're like, yeah, you know, this sounds like pretty good. And, you know, like they'd known that I was going to call them at the like towards the end. I was like, yeah, you know, I just want to labor at home, you know, alone with my husband and my doula, and, you know, just kind of call you guys like, yeah, but like later on, like, yeah, that sounds good. And then I think they're starting to get nervous that I wasn't going to call. But I was like, no, like I plan to call you guys. It's going to happen. That's the plan. Just at the last second. They don't need to know that though. So yeah, like had the birth plan with them, and then yeah, still just like so pregnant, 40 weeks, 41 weeks. And then I had, you know, one of those appointments with the midwives, and we were talking about induction and going over date. And she was like, okay, well, like, you know the risks. And I was like, yep, I know the risks. And she's like, well, how about instead of me going over what the risks are, why don't you tell me what the risks are? I was like, okay, kind of like this, but I also feel like you're testing me and I don't really enjoy this at all. So I had to tell them that, I was like, you know, I know the risk is like for stillbirth, it goes up by a certain percentage, but also that's at a population level. All of these recommendations are at population level. They're not like specific individual level. And she's like, okay, great. Like, we don't need to talk anymore. You're good. You know the risks. I was like, yeah, that's exactly how all of these are done. Like for everything, like for the like glucose stress test, like everything.
It's kind of nice that she, like, in a way, I don't know if you felt it was nice, but that she let you say it, so she didn't have to keep telling you, like, except, like, this is always a thing, except someone could die. That's what they're always saying. And she's like, if she knows you know, then she's covered herself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, for her license, to maintain her life. Like, if something goes awry, she can be like, no, she knew.
She knew. We had this
like, either I have to tell her or she's telling me. Yeah, so she just let it it sounds like she was respectful of choice. She just needed to make sure
that I knew. She's like, I just have to hear you say it, then I don't have to say it.
Yeah. As long as everybody's aware, we can be adults and make our own choices.
Exactly. Yeah. So I like, in the moment I was like, this is weird. I feel like I'm being tested. And I was like, I don't like tests. Like, I've done too many of those in my life. But I just like said it. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that's like, that must be the reason. I'm assuming that is because that's always what I've read. Reason. Yeah. Yeah. She's like, yep, you're right. Okay, good. As long as you know the risks. Yeah. And then my midwifery appointments became like they just come to my house every couple days, take my blood pressure, and I go past 42 weeks and I'm like, oh my God. Like, and then I remember my doula, Ariel, she's like, well, Erin, like legally they have to take you to 43 weeks. And I was like, okay, that's good. That's good to know. Like I have 43 weeks. I'm pretty sure that's a fact, not 100%, but she's like 43 weeks. And I was like, okay, cool. I can do this. So yeah, I remember the day before I went into labor, I was just like, dude, we gotta get this baby out. This cannot, like, this baby cannot stay in me forever. And we went for a nice big walk in North Vancouver with the dog. And my husband's like, okay, I think you want to turn around? I was like, no, let's keep walking. I'm good.
Walk it out.
Yeah, I'm gonna walk this baby out. So we did like a huge walk, and I mean, at that point, I was only walking like to the end of the block and back for the most part, because I was just so uncomfortable. But yeah, did that big walk in nature, came home, and I was like, okay, I think I'm feeling things. And then the midwives are like, hey, maybe we'll come over and take your blood pressure. And I was like, no, you're not. Like, I'm good. They're like, no, like, you're pretty overdate. Like, we should probably come and take your blood pressure. I was like, no, like, I'm okay. I don't want you coming. She's like, no, like, we should do it. No. So I just ended up telling her, I was like, like, I'm feeling some things happening. Like, I just don't want it to turn into a thing. And I also don't want me to go into labor while she's at my house. That's like my worst case scenario for me. So they didn't come, and then, felt some things that evening. This is on the 9th, and then on like the Saturday, and then on the, that was on the Sunday, and then on that was on Saturday. Yes. And then Sunday morning, I woke up at like 3 a.m. I was like, okay, I'm feeling stuff. Like, I can't sleep through this. I was like, okay, this means I'm going into labor, but it could not mean that also. Don't get too excited. So I like covered up all the lights. I like pulled down the blinds. I covered up like the, all the time on our like devices in the kitchen, the microwave and the stove. I was like, I don't want to know the time. I don't want to be put on a clock. I covered up the temperature. I was like, I don't even want to know what temperature it is. It also has like blue light coming out of it. It feels like weird vibes. And I started like feeling stuff, just like kind of crampy, but not able to sleep through it. Got on the birth ball. So I kind of start petting the dog. That's going to bring on my oxytocin. And then I like hopped in the shower. My husband finally woke up and he's like, okay, how are things going? I'm like, it's happening, but it's, it's going slow. Just don't talk to me. I'm just going to do my own thing. And like, I'll tell you when I need you. And he's like, okay, great. Because we have to also coordinate the office clients for the week and see what's happening and like what we want to do. And so he's just trying to coordinate that and like get someone in there to cancel the week. Had some contractions, or I like to call them waves. Like I had some waves in the shower, just kind of able to get through that on my own. And then at one point I was like, hey, like things are feeling strong. Like I think like I need either you squeezing my hips throughout the entire, like throughout every wave, or we have to call the doula. I have to call Ariel. And so we decided it was like time to call Ariel. Ariel came. And I remember when I saw her, I just started crying. And I was like, I'm not crying because I'm in pain. Like, I mean, I'm in pain, but I mean, I'm just crying because this means I'm not going to be pregnant anymore. And I finally get to meet my baby. Because at that point, I was 43 plus 3. Or no, 42 plus 3.
So is this according to your LMP, or was it, right? This is according to the dates the midwives had.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And And
But
then
your baby already told you she was coming at this time.
Yeah, that she was coming in July. But I thought July 1st. And I was like, we're on July 9th right now. Like, this is quite late, even for my standards. So I was like, okay, like, thank God she's here. And then, you know, we had like a little laugh, and then she kind of just like helped me through some more waves. And then, yeah, labor is crazy. I mean, it's wild. Like, you're so in your body in the moment, and then you're off on another dimension. So it took me a little bit longer to get to the other dimension, but yeah, I remember like laboring like on the toilet with like a leg up, and my legs just trembling and shaking, and like being bent over the sink and like having the perfect situation. I was like, okay, I'm gonna sit on the ball, I'm gonna cross my arms perfectly, rest my head here, have the pad so it's comfortable. Like, everything has to be comfortable and just as it is, and you know exactly what you want.
Yeah.
And if anything is like outside of that, you just like smack it right back into line. Like, nope, just like this. Like, one thing that helped me through each wave was the hip squeezes. And at one point, I remember my Ariel stepped in, and she was doing like a few hip squeezes, and I fired her. I was like, Ariel, like, I love you so much, but you're fired. Like, you can't, like, you cannot be doing the hip squeezes. Like, I need Pavan doing the hip squeezes for me. Like, it's not the same. He's really he's dialed those down. Just like, it's okay, I'm not offended. Like, it's weird on my wrists anyways. Yeah, and I remember like, it's funny. It's like, you don't remember the whole thing, but you remember these like moments here and there. And like, one of them, I was like sitting on the toilet, and my husband's sitting on like the bathtub ledge, and I'm like grabbing his hand and squeezing. And I remember he like has this pain face, and kind of like he wanted to say something and complain, and he almost did. I was like, what? And he's like, nothing.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. And then there was like the towel rod, and I really like, I just wanted to grab onto that so bad. It's just like, you know, it just looks like the perfect thing to grab onto. And he's like, not the towel rod, and like trying to like, don't do that. We don't need to
take it right out of the wall.
Yeah, exactly. We don't need to do any home repairs after the baby's here. So yeah, there's like that moment, and yeah, just like hot. I remember when my when Ariel was like, okay, like the tub's ready, you know, whenever you want to get in. And I was like, oh, I can get in the tub. Like, she wants me, like, that means I'm getting close, because we've had this conversation, is that, you know, she tries to save that for the end because it feels so good, and also it's like really hard to manage the temperature and like the cleanup, and it's just like a lot to manage. So I was like, oh, that means I must be getting close. And we're like hopping in there, and it just felt so good. Like, that was the best feeling ever. A lot more manageable. And yeah, just like, I feel like I was in the tub for hours, and I was in the tub for hours. And like, what else was there? Those like little moments. Like, my husband ordered them pizza, and I remember,
no,
like,
why?
I know.
My husband did too.
Really?
Yeah, and I'm like, why? I know it's like quick and like canned food. Maybe that's what people think, but
yeah,
it
totally.
smells so bad in that moment.
That was it. It was just like, because I was in the tub, and I found this perfect position where I would put my hands up on the ledge of the tub, and it's like the birth pool. So we had the birth pool set up in the baby's room. And so I'd have my hands up and like rest my head, and it was the perfect situation where my body would be immersed, but my head would be out, and I could also drift off and fall asleep, but my head wouldn't fall in the water. It was the perfect situation. And I remember like, I'd just be in another dimension, and then slowly I'd feel the waves come on, and then it was just like the and the deep ohms starting to come in, like, and you know, Ariel and Pavan coming into the room, and they'd get in there, they'd like assume their positions, and all I could smell was pizza.
Yeah.
Why pizza of all the things? Like, it smells so bad. I love them to death, though. Yeah, and then just like we had lit a like at this point it's like nighttime. There was like a candlestick that was lit, and I just remember like watching it because I didn't know what time it was, but just like watching it burn down slowly. It's like time is passing. It's happening, and there's still no baby. And yeah, I remember being at one point like it was still kind of like light out because it was summer, so it doesn't get dark till like 10. And it's still somewhat light, and I felt like that like pressure start to build like in your bum. I was like, oh, like baby, this means baby's coming. Like, who knows? Maybe we'll have this baby before the day's over. And I got so excited and like feeling that pressure build and build and build, and then all of a sudden like nothing. It's like, oh my gosh, what just happened? And just kind of like waited around in the pool, in the tub, and going through each wave, and just like nothing really. So then Ariel was like, hey, maybe it's time to get out of the pool. I was like, no, we can't get out of the pool onto dry land. Like, that's not where this baby's coming out. She's like, okay, like we'll get onto your bed. Maybe we'll take a nap. And I was like, oh no, I don't want to do a nap. No. She's like, no, like it's going to be good. We'll get you into a few different positions. We'll just try something different. I wasn't into it, but I was like, I trust her so much. She definitely knows what she's talking about. So got out the rebozo scarf and did a few like jiggles on my butt, just really trying to shake things up and get that baby like moving like down into the pelvis and like engaging. So did like a couple of waves there, and I think that really, really helped. And I somehow fell asleep, even though it was like, I remember waking up and having a wave on the bed, lying on my side and being in so much discomfort.
Yeah.
That's never like, if anyone suggests like to lay down or you think it's a good idea, it's probably not a good idea to lay down when you're in labor. So yeah, like after that, like waking up, I remember from that little nap and just kind of like looking at Ariel and be like, can I get back in the water now? Is the tub ready? She's like, oh yeah, of course. Like you can go in the water whenever. Oh, great. So I hopped back in the water, and then like pressure started to come back. Like, okay, this is great. Things are happening. And I just thought of like one more thing before all this happened. Like I remember at one point being in one of our bathrooms and standing and like holding on to the sink with one hand and like holding on to my husband's hand with the other. And just this like lightning bolt thought came into my head where I was like, we had 2 baby names picked out, one for a boy, one for a girl, because we didn't know what we were having. And in my mind, it was like, this is Zora. And like I was like, this is Zora. Like that was our baby name. Like this is her. There's no way this is that other baby. Like there's no way. So yeah, that was a funny, crazy moment too.
The knowing, right? Like the deep knowing. I feel like that's part of the traveling and the, like when you're like out of your body and you're in your body and you're like, that's the information available to you out there. If you could access that at any time, it's amazing.
It is like so amazing.
That kind of knowing that you get, like you knew which baby it was, or even like you said, like, what temperature the room needs to be, who should be touching you. And like, there's no time for niceties. Like I'm not being rude, but I'm going to be really direct. Like
100,
this is exactly 100%. What needs to happen here. And you just know, like, I don't know, like in so many like other times and areas of my life, I'm like, I don't know, it could be the other one. I don't know, not in labor. I know.
Yeah, totally. And I even remember that during my pregnancy, like when I first found out I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm pregnant. It's a girl. And then I started to second guess myself throughout the pregnancy. I was like, oh, I don't know, it could be a boy. And then I was like, it's a girl. And then even my dad, he was like, it's a girl. Like I know it's a girl.
Yeah.
It's like, but how do you know? He's like, I was like, but what if you're wrong? He's like, I'm not wrong.
It's the knowing that transcends like intellectual knowing. Like that's where we question ourselves when we get into like your frontal lobes, your head, your, and you start to be like, how could I know? What do I know? But when you know on that soul level, that's a knowing that's like no other. Exactly. And I think maybe that's the journey of motherhood, is learning to trust that knowing and to tune into that more. Because that's the the gift of motherhood, I think.
Oh yeah, 100. I totally agree with that. And just like that feeling and that like lightning rod, like yes, no. So yeah, so I'll give you like a quick little like layout. So how our condo is laid out is when you walk into like the kitchen living room, and then there's two on like the right side there's a bedroom, and on the left side there's a bedroom like directly off of the living room. So I remember like I had first planned to put the birth pool in like the living room, and Ariel had suggested, she's like, actually, you know what I was thinking? She's like, what if we put the birth tub in the baby room? I was like, oh, that's brilliant. She's like, yeah, well then that way, you know, you can have a little privacy. So say if the midwives were there, you can always like shut the door. So I did put that in my birth plan, which I'm so thankful for. Because in my birth plan, I said, you know, like, this is what's going to happen. Like, when you guys buzz up, you'll come into the living room. Like, I'll more than likely be in, like, the baby room, like, in the birth pool. And you can either knock on the door, or my, like, Ariel or Pavin will come out and they will update you on the situation and let you know if you're welcome in the room. So that was already pre-decided, and I knew that. And oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that I put that in my plan. Just because it just gave me that power and gave me that like decision and that control, which I wanted. So I was like in the baby room, just kind of really like going through those waves. And this is like early morning the next day on the 10th. Yeah. And gosh, I just remember like feeling the pressure build up, and this may be like graphic, but I just felt like my clitoris was just gonna pop off of my body. Yeah. And I remember like feeling the pressure in your bum and how it just all of a sudden it just creeps right up to the front, and you can just feel it. You're like, oh my gosh, the pressure is now in my vagina and my clitoris is gonna pop off of my body. And like that was like my thing. I'm gonna lose it. My husband's like, you're not gonna lose it. You're like, it's gonna stay on your body, I promise. So yeah, like feeling that pressure build up, and like feeling that pressure build up, and my water still hadn't broken. And I remember asking Ariel, like how did when does my water, like what does that feel like what's gonna happen next? And despite like, you know, your thinking brain, like I'm trying to reason with it. I'm also like a very logical, realistic person. I want to know the next step. I want to be one step ahead. And so she's like, oh, you know, it's gonna pop. It's gonna feel so good. And I was like, okay. And I remember like building up all that pressure, and then all of a sudden my water broke. And I was like, oh my gosh, that felt fabulous. The best feeling. I thought so. I felt like it felt like a water balloon shooting out of my vagina in the best way. Yeah. So what I didn't know was next was the actual pressure of the head then.
Yeah. That's the part I remember. I was like, wow. Like then there's nothing like holding the head back anymore. So it's just like right on.
Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh my God, I have to build up all that pressure all over again. But that pressure comes. So I'm like building up that pressure again. And then it's funny because I don't even really remember when her head came out, like the difference between that and like when the water broke. I remember specifically when the water broke, but I don't remember when her head came out.
Wow. Yeah. Like no ring of fire. You didn't get that.
I do remember saying, like, I don't remember the actual feeling, but I have a video of me being like, it's so spicy.
Yeah. It's really spicy.
And I asked, it's funny because I would like, you know, you're so out there in a different universe. Yeah. And then I would come back into my body and I'd ask a question. And then like to Ariel, like what's happening or what's next? She'd be like, okay, like, is this, or I'd be like, is this the ring of fire? And she'd be like, oh, it's so overrated. It's fine. You're going to be great. And then next thing you know, I'm like, it's so spicy. So kind of had like that little ring of fire. Don't really remember that. So it couldn't be that bad. And then yeah, like I remember this part the best, but it's like, do you remember it because you remember it, or do you remember it because
Yeah.
you've watched the video so
Yeah.
much, you know? So yeah, it was like on my knees, and I do remember like feeling her rotate through my pelvis, and that was the craziest feeling because you can feel everything. You
Yeah.
feel like the limb, you feel like the elbow, the shoulder, everything is just like moving around and rotating through, and that was like the coolest sensation. And I was just like, whoa, like along for the ride. And she was just doing her thing, like moving where she needed to. And, I had that like pause and that break, which I desperately needed. And then she just came sliding out. Like I didn't really have to push through that part. She just like fetal ejection reflex whoop, came out. Like I caught her in the water, and the
Were
first
you
thing
like
I said,
sitting, or like
I
what was your
was
position in the water?
I was like on my knees.
Mm-hmm.
So I was
Yeah.
on my knees, kind of leaning forward, and then I
Yeah.
kind of like leaned on my back, and then like as I rotated, she just kind of shot through.
Yeah.
And like I caught her like this, like on my like leaning up against the back
Yeah.
of the tub, caught her. In the video, I'm like, it's a baby, it's a baby. Like, what was I expecting? Like a puppy or something? But it's just like so wild. Like, holy.
Yeah. A
And she
whole
didn't come
human
out.
just came out of you.
A whole human.
Yeah.
And she didn't cry. Like, she was just like eyes open, but like water babies usually take like a little bit longer. But no, she was just like eyes open, just kind of creeping around and just like puttering. Like it was just so perfect. And she was fuzzy, and I remember just like looking down at her and being like, "You're so fuzzy." Like I knew that you were gonna be fuzzy. Like I knew it. Like I knew that you were gonna have fuzz on your ears, and there it is. The fuzz is everywhere, and like you got a nice little head of hair. Like I would have been shocked. And I remember telling everyone, like, "Oh, Zora, like my baby's gonna have hair. Like they're gonna be fuzzy. I already know it." And I would be shocked if I gave birth to like a bald baby or like no fuzz. That would have been even. I'd be like, "This isn't my baby." So yeah, it was that, and then we hung out in the tub for a little bit. Explored her, learned that it was a girl, of course. Like no shocker there. And then I was like, okay, like I'm ready to get out of the tub. Like this is not comfortable anymore. And I couldn't really like have her up as high as I wanted her. So I got up, and my husband and Ariel like helped me, and I was just holding the baby. And then we walked across, like from the baby room, walked across the living room, and the midwives were there. And I was like, "Oh, hi," and they're like, "Congratulations." I was like, "Yeah, thank you so much." Because they were in the room. It was perfect. They were there, and I didn't meet them. They just stayed in the living room. And I was like, "Okay, thanks. I'll invite you in when I'm ready." So we walked across the living room, and then Ariel and Pavan helped me get situated onto the bed. And, I think at that point, I hadn't even like nursed her yet, but I was just like inspecting her and like looking at her. And then I remember feeling those like contractions, and just like all of a sudden I'd be like doing, like we'd be looking and talking, and I'd be like, "Oh, like, oh." And I asked Ariel, I was like, "Hey, is it too soon to deliver my placenta? Like I'm feeling kind of like gross and like crampy." And she's like, "No, like it's perfect time. This is great. Like let's do it." And so I like knelt on my bed. I'm just gonna do it because it's easier. I remember like kneeling on my bed on like a little puppy pad underneath. And then we had talked about this, Ariel and I, previously, about like how to like wrap your hand around the cord to get like more traction and tension. It's like I remember wrapping my hand, and then the one thing I was not like sad about, but I was like, "Oh no, I have to go back to like the birth space and like my deep ohms." And I was like, "Oh gosh." And my husband's like right here in front of my body, and we're like resting my head on his head. And then Zora's just like laying down between my legs and just like doing some ohms and some pushes and like saying, a little thank you in my head, like, thank you so much, like, thanks for supporting my baby, like, no longer like of service, but like I appreciate you, and then pulling and pulling, and that was the craziest sensation. That one felt like honestly more primal than having birth. Because it's like a whole organ comes out of you. Yeah. And it's big.
Like the size of the baby almost.
Yeah. And I remember like it coming out, and then Ariel was filming, so I wanted it on film too. And I was like, oh my God. And is it okay if I cuss on here or no?
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, now that's the fucking placenta. It's a fucking placenta. And then I was like, I don't know what to do. And my hands are like covered in blood.
Yeah.
And Ariel's like, well, first just look at me. And then she like look at her with the camera with my hands. Like pop it in a bowl. And then, like get situated back on the bed. And then I like breastfed Zora. We probably had like about an hour and a half probably closer to an hour and a half with just Zora and I and Poppin, and Ariel went back out to the midwives, and they're just like catching up on the birth and how everything like went. And then finally, like I was like, okay, like I think like I kind of want them to leave, so I guess I have to let them in to release them, or at least that was my thought in my head. Mm-hmm. So invited them in. They weighed and measured her. And yeah, she's like 8.5 pounds.
Did you cut the cord by then?
No, we hadn't cut the cord by then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we still had the cord attached. Yeah, so they came in, weighed and measured her. She was 8.5 pounds, and then her length was 53 centimeters. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yeah, because then her head was 35. And that was cute, like a fat 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I remember one of the midwives was like, oh, like it says on here that you're like 42 plus 4, but like this baby doesn't look like it's that, like it's that old.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, like I knew it. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, I think my date was off. And then we went back over the dates, and I was like, well, this was the date of like conception. And they're just like, yeah, there's just something's not right here with the dates. And I was like, well, I told you so. So I don't know what that was all about. And they did that based off like multiple things, like what is the last day of your
last menstrual period, LMP.
Yeah, exactly.
Last menstrual. Yeah. First day of your last period.
First day of your last. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we did it off of that, and they're like, yeah, it just doesn't really add up. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, but she's here, so it's fine. Mm-hmm. And then I had tore a little bit. So I had like a periclitoral tear. So it kind of like tore up towards the clitoris.
That's why you thought it was going to pop off.
Yep, exactly. And then I had like a small like labial tear. Mm-hmm. So this is the one thing I'm like, I didn't really do too much research on like tears. Mm-hmm. So they had recommended like, they're like, we could just stitch it up here. One of the midwives was like, I don't feel comfortable stitching this. The other one was like, I do feel comfortable. And the third option was like, we could transfer you, and then you can get like, stitches there. I was like, well, definitely not transferring. We're not ruining this. Mm-hmm. Not that I felt pressured into getting the stitches, but I just didn't feel like I had enough information.
Yeah.
And it felt like it was the easiest option, and I didn't like that. So I ended up getting stitches just on the periclitoral tear, not the labial tear. Because then they also said like, you could have extra flabby bits. That was like how it might heal. I was like, well, I don't really like my vagina being described as extra flabby bits.
Yeah,
so
what?
I think, yeah. So
that's a poor choice of words at any time.
Yeah, exactly. So I did end up getting the stitches on the like periclitoral, and then I just asked. I was like, just do not get super close to the clitoris. Like, I definitely don't want to mess up like those nerve endings.
Yeah.
So then, yeah, they stitched that, and that was pretty uncomfortable, like postpartum wise, but it all healed up pretty like just fine. So there's like no altered sensation now, but yeah, that was our birth, and it was just epic. Like looking back, I loved how I controlled so many other factors, and I feel like I really set myself up for success, like learning about the different phases of birth. And like,
Yeah.
I knew that I didn't want to have any type of like interventions. Like, I didn't want to have cervical checks. Like, I didn't even want to tell people that I was in labor because I was just like, that just puts pressure on me. And then all of a sudden, people are distracted. Like, I didn't want my husband to be distracted, like texting people updates. Like, that's not necessary. So yeah, it was amazing. I
Oh,
loved it.
it's pretty crazy. It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Yes. So tell me, so in your reflection on your time with the midwives, when you hired midwives, like it kind of sounds like you didn't really take any, like get anything from them.
Yeah, that's
Right? Like
funny.
it was mostly declining.
Yeah, it was exactly that, and that's exactly what my birth plan was like, decline this, decline that, decline this. And even when I went, like half the time, like sometimes I took blood pressure, sometimes I didn't. I was like, I'm good, like it's fine.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, it wasn't anything too like special, but it was nice to be able to connect about the pregnancy, or for someone to ask me how I'm doing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Like, what was it you did want from them? Like when you're like, I'm hiring midwives because I want, what was it?
I think I just wanted support, and I wanted to learn more, but at the same time, like I got that more so from my doula care. I got like that's what I was wanting, and that's what I got from like I thought that was going to be the midwife relationship. That was not the midwife relationship. The midwife relationship was like, we're doing our due diligence, we're checking this off the list, we're checking this off the list. Like, are you educated on this? Yeah. So I do wish I had more of that, like getting to know the midwives and, actually connecting and them giving me really great resources.
Yeah.
Which I don't think that happened. One of them did recommend the Sarah Wickham book for like the anti-D one, which is the rhogam. So that was helpful. But then I remember at one point I had a call with one of the midwives because I still had some virtual appointments, which was absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I remember at one of those virtual calls, I said that I didn't want any like fetal monitoring during labor. Like, little did they know at that point that like they weren't even invited to my birth. You wouldn't even be there. But I was like, yeah, I don't want any fetal monitoring. Like, oh, well, how will we know that the baby's okay? And I was like, well, I will know. Like, well, how will you know? I was like, well, I will know because that's like I trust my intuition, and that's like an internal source. And I told them this. I was like, once I start trusting that external source, like it slowly invalidates my own like internal compass of what's happening.
Yeah. You'll silence that internal voice.
Yeah. Once you start getting this external validation that like things are okay or things aren't okay, then that internal validation starts to go away, or that just like that feeling and that knowing.
Yeah. Agreed. I had like pretty much the same conversation with midwives with my the 2-year-old I have now. Yeah. Same one about, no, I would know. I will for sure know. And I'll tell you if there's a problem.
Yeah, because like even though like my labor was like 30 hours pretty much start to finish, and at no point was I like something's wrong. Like something doesn't feel right. Like I knew it was kind of weird that things like stopped, like the pressure stopped building. But then when Ariel came in and was like, hey, let's do this, it was like, well, that just makes sense.
That also happens in birth.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I know Wapio talks about that. And I think I just did like a podcast interview with someone where we were talking about this, where that's actually like a relatively common thing. So it's considered like stalled labor in a hospital, like a problem, that we have to like do something about. But for there to be like a bit of a break between like the really active labor and pushing, like even where a woman can fall asleep. So I've had that in one of my births. I had that. Where everything stopped, and I like was lucky enough that I didn't have anybody there. It was just like a doula with me.
Yeah.
So it was normalized.
Totally.
Yeah. And that's actually kind of a common thing. So you get to rest, and then your body just kicks up again. It's like, okay, now we're ready
Yeah,
for the big
totally.
work.
I think I've listened to a podcast from Wapio that talked about that, and how she's like, yeah, you climb this mountain, climb, and then you get to the top, and who doesn't stop to take in the view and like take a rest, like eat a snack?
I love that.
And I think she says that, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's exactly what happened. It's like my body was like, oh, let's just take a rest.
Yeah.
And then we'll
just
go
take a
right
minute
back
here.
at it.
Yeah, your last moments before your baby comes. And it's like it's a bit of work to get the baby out, right? Like once the pushing starts. So yeah, it makes sense.
And that was like another part about the birth and like labor part, because I remember at one point I was like asking Ariel, I was like, am I supposed to be pushing? Like, what's happening? So I just didn't know. And there's like so much of that part of me that's like trusting and knowing. And then I was like, I was also just so done with being in labor. I was like, I just want to meet my damn baby at this point. So I do remember like actively pushing. This is like much before like like after the water broke, but then before she actually came out, and just like really trying to like get her down. It's like, I just need to like really drive this along a little bit more.
Yeah. And you know when you can do that and when you need to not.
Oh, just like during the actual like birth part, though, like when she was coming out, like that was the easiest part. There's no pushing involved. It's like she just flew right out.
So cool. Like you didn't have to work really hard, you feel, for like her body to emerge.
No, not
interesting.
At all.
That's interesting, especially with a first baby. Lots of times there's a lot of work on the first one. Yeah.
I felt like I did all that work before. I was like, oh my gosh.
Maybe, hey?
Yeah.
So neat. How was your postpartum experience?
My postpartum was really great. I also I set myself up for success. I like did so much meal prep beforehand.
So good.
I made a bunch of like bone broths and soups with the bone broth, and I froze those in like little cubes. And I had a plan. Like I was gonna do, I think it was 5 days in bed, 5 days on the bed, and 5 days around the bed. So that happened. Like my husband, I really actually did 14 days in the bed, which was amazing. So my husband took that first week off, and that's the only week that he got off. So it was just us during that first week. That was just so great. And I basically I should have had like a little bell bedside at this point, because I wake up first thing and I'm like, okay, I'll take a muffin to start and 1 cup of oatmeal with berries, and then I'll move on to my like second breakfast.
Perfect. Just how it should be.
Yeah. And then I did set up actually like a really small meal train with just like my close girlfriends. So it wasn't like public or anything. And I had organized that through my second, third, fourth week. So I had a friend coming and walking the dog and dropping off food every every couple of days, which was really helpful just to get like a different change of food. Like we had enough food that I had already made. But just getting like a switch up was really nice.
Yes.
Yeah. And then my family doesn't live here. So my mother-in-law came and helped out for a few mornings on my second week, but she was mostly just like helping with dishes, bringing food, heating up food, like watching the baby while I showered. But even then, like Zora was in my arms 24/7, like all contact naps. Like it was amazing. And then my parents came up. Let's see, I think they came up when she was about 10 days old. And I was a little worried about that. I just didn't really know. I had really low expectations because I didn't know. I thought if I set my expectation bar really low, I will be happily surprised, and I might get stuck hosting, and that's not really what I want. And that was also a scary part about Zora getting so late. And it was like, oh my gosh, now who knows? They might get here the day that she arrives, and I don't want that. Like I want that time with just us. But no, they came, and my parents were so awesome. they were we live in a condo, so they stayed in like a little rental suite within our condo. Nice. So they would come up, they'd walk the dog, make me breakfast, like help out, do whatever I needed. And then I'd be like, okay, I think we're going to go lay down. And they'd be like, okay, we're out of your space. We're going to go down. And it was awesome. Oh, and it was just beautiful. Nice to, yeah. And at that point in time, I was like, okay, I can have the blinds open. When before, for the first at least like 8 days, like I couldn't even open the blinds. Couldn't watch TV, couldn't do anything. It was so overstimulating.
Yeah.
And yeah, I just wanted to be in that little like birth cocoon with her.
Yeah. I think it, like it takes some time to come down from like whatever trip you're on in birth, you know, like you're still a little bit in that, like everything feels like foggy or hazy to me. And it's sort of a nice way. Like if you have the space to lay in bed, it's a nice way. If you have to get up and like do life, it's not great. But,
yeah. I'm like, I don't even know how, like, I don't know how people with two babies do it without sending their like second baby away for like a week. But I guess you just balance, or you find what you need like in that time that's going to help. It's
like the fortitude and strength always comes for whatever you need to do if you're open to that. But it made me realize this last time, like how I think important like intergenerational living is, and why there's value to that, right? If you have like, just think if there were grandmas and grandpas and aunties and cousins around to support the toddler or toddlers and to feed the mama who can then take care of the baby. I'm like, yeah, that's where it's at. And if that's not around you, you know, like calling in the friends or hiring a postpartum doula or someone even just like to take the toddler out, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, it takes a village, truly. Like,
yeah, I totally agree with that. It's funny, like with us, we have a really active dog, and that's like our toddler. Yeah. And that was my biggest concern was like, what are we going to do with the dog? What are we going to do with the dog? Like, I have to walk the dog. Like, that's kind of what I do when I'm home. And I've been doing that when I was off from 35 weeks up to 42 weeks. I've been walking the dog. But yeah, so my brother-in-law came and picked up the dog during the labor. She was there for a bit, and I was like, let's get that dog out of here. Like, this is just one more thing to think about.
Yeah.
And then, when she came home, my husband took care of her, and then and then like my in-laws were here, so they like walked her here and there, and then like my parents were just awesome. And then by then I was like, okay, I can do this. I can do a little tiny walk. And my husband was still like walking her a lot too.
Yeah. Oh, the logistics are always interesting how that lays out, but it works out.
It does work out. Yeah. And I really enjoyed I don't know if there'd be too much that I would change about my postpartum experience. We did have my mother and father-in-law come and visit, and like brother-in-law the day that she was born. That wasn't part of the plan. But I think I don't know if I would do that again. I think I would just keep it the first 24 hours. That was what it was supposed to be, is 24 hours, just us. Mm-hmm. But that changed. I think so. I think I'd protect that 24 hours, or even extend that to 48 hours of just baby, family. But I know that gets into logistics, you know, when you're planning a second. And so and lots more I'd make more muffins for sure.
Yeah.
I went through those like candy.
They're so good. Like things you can hold in your hand. Too good.
Yeah.
Too good. And carbs. There's something about like carbs, like after that big marathon you've just gone through.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I remember I made this, I made like bone broth, and I made this really amazing butternut squash soup. And my husband was like, okay, like, what do you want for like postpart at like your first meal? And I was like, oh, I want the butternut squash soup. Like, it tastes like Thanksgiving dinner. It's so good. And he accidentally heated up the wrong cube, and he's like, well, I have bone broth for you. And I was like, okay, that's actually even better, actually. Like, drink some bone broth. And I was like, well, now I'll take the soup though.
Yeah, now I want that recipe. That sounds delightful.
Oh, it's so good.
Yeah.
Definitely send it your way.
Thank you. For the last birth, I made scones, and I froze the dough so they could just be put in the oven. And then my husband burnt them because he was doing like all the things. Like he was draining the pool and cleaning up and like doing all this. And I was like, oh, that's like almost makes me want to cry right now. It's okay.
Luckily ours were just like the muffins were pre-cooked, and then so you just like, and then frozen, and then you could defrost those. And I had like, gosh, I had made these 2 recipes out of the first 40 days. And one was like a custard, and the other one was coconut macaroons. And that was so good to have on hand. And I had kind of made it like knowing like, I'm going to go into labor soon, and this is going to be delicious. And I was so happy I made that, because it's just like a yolky custard. Oh, so good.
Yeah, that sounds great. With this baby, she was born at 37 weeks, so I had nothing prepped. I was like, I got time. Like 37 weeks on the dot. Like, oh my God. You never know.
Yeah, that's so true. But I remember at the end of mine, I was just joking around with my husband. I'm like, we might as well just like go back. Like I stopped like going to CrossFit probably around like 32 weeks. So like, I think I'm just gonna like really go into like more walking and just like gentle exercise, like some yoga and stuff. And I was like, I might as well just go back to CrossFit, or like even just start working again at this point. Like this is ridiculous. Like I've been off for 2 months.
Stay pregnant forever.
Like, yeah, exactly. Like I was that one person who was gonna be pregnant, and Ariel told me it like after I gave birth. She's like, I wasn't gonna tell you when you were pregnant, but you're the longest any of my clients has ever gone. I was like, oh God, I'm really glad you didn't tell me that while I was pregnant. But I'm happy I keep the record.
Yep. Just around the time she was born, I knew like 3 or 4 that were pregnant and due before me, like a couple weeks before me. And all these babies went to like 42, 43 weeks. And I had the baby first. And it was just so crazy.
Yeah, that's not what you're imagining. Yeah,
like they have their own time. And if we don't evict them or like, like babies know just when they're supposed to be born. So.
Oh, I totally agree with that. Yeah, there was lots of people who were due after me that were having babies before me, and I was just like, it's like at that point you just get off of Instagram. You're just like, I can't even be on Instagram because everyone's having their baby except for me.
Yeah,
great.
They always come out. They do always come out.
They always come out.
Yeah, it's true. Oh, thank you so much for sharing your story. Do you want to say how can people contact you?
Yes, of course. People can find us. So my husband and I, we have a chiropractic office. It's a family-based chiropractic office in East Vancouver. The name is The Chiro Culture. And you can find us on Google, on Instagram, at The Chiro Culture. People are more than welcome to follow along. I have a public Instagram. I don't post very often, but they can find me at Dr. Erin Rockra on Instagram. Yeah, anyone who wants to talk birth, I love it. It was dream birth for me, at least.
Dream birth. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Melissa.